Good day, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining today's special edition of Teneo Insights. I'm Kevin Kajiwara in New York City. This week, Teneo released its fourth annual CEO and Investor Outlook Survey, capturing the views of more than 750 global public company CEOs and institutional investors, representing more than $19 trillion in company and portfolio value. The finding this year revealed tempered optimism among global CEOs, with leaders increasingly focused on AI-driven transformation while continuing to navigate persistent market and geopolitical volatility. Here to discuss the findings with me is Paul Keary, CEO and co-founder of Teneo, who leads the firm's 1,700 people across 45 offices worldwide while serving as a trusted advisor to many CEO clients. Well, Paul, thanks very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And as I said in the introduction, the annual survey has just come out, and it's, of course, notable that these CEOs and investors are responding after a pretty, I think we'd have to all agree, an extraordinary year, a noisy year, disruptive year. It's also notable that last year's survey was taken right around the time of the election. And so coming out of that, there was this sort of general afterglow of the election, a general sense that this new administration, irrespective of what you thought of it from a holistic perspective, there was generally going to be a pro-growth administration based on a reduction in taxes, a reduction in regulations, et cetera, and unleashing an IPO market, M&A market, and so on and so forth, some of which got backloaded into the year, some of which all wound up being true to a certain degree. But there was a lot of noise and chaos in there. I don't think anybody anticipated perhaps the volatility of the tariff policy as an example. So when you look at this year's results as we turn toward 2026 now, what's the sort of high-level takeaways you gleaned from the report? And especially given how many CEOs you counsel on a daily basis, did you find that the survey results were roughly in line with what you're hearing anecdotally and in your daily conversations? Or were there any surprises in there for you?
Yeah, it's the right way to think about it. The year over year and maybe even multiple year over year analysis, we have seen so much change, right? The transformation of the global economy from an AI perspective, just the geopolitical roiling that has changed the dynamics of Europe, the dynamics of the Middle East, changed political administrations around the world, including in the US. So not just year over year, I think is interesting. I think if you go back to 2022, almost 3/4 of global CEOs were not optimistic about the growth prospects for the first half of 2023. And it's the inverse for 2025 into 2026. You still have a vast majority of CEOs and investors expect growth in the first half of next year. That growth has slowed on a year-over-year basis, but we're still talking about a CEO and investor class who think that M&A is still a growth driver. The IPO market is still something that is likely to yield returns and greater frequency. That an expectation, I think, that the trade and tariff disruption over 2025 will normalize. And you've seen some signs of such within the US and other trade deals. So I think that's leading to still optimism, albeit tempered from quite
right.
Unprecedented exuberance you and I discussed this time last year.
Do you think that, it seems that it is sort of in the DNA of a CEO to generally be optimistic, otherwise they ought not to be running a company probably. But do you, as you talk to CEOs and as you look at the survey results, as an advisor yourself, are there any cautionary elements here where you think perhaps, not that there is irrational exuberance, because I understand what you're saying. Their enthusiasm is tempered over, say, what it was last year. But are there areas of concern where you're like, hey, you know what? I think you need to take another look here.
I think there's been some concern expressed in the survey about some of the stresses in the debt market. I think there are some concerns in some of the lower income socioeconomic groups. I think there are some concerns that we have a divergent economy of the capex and AI world, perhaps the rest of the world. I think there's concerns that the equity market appreciation of 20+% year over year doth not reflect a 20% increase in the growth of the economy. So there are warning signs out there that there's further disruption ahead. But as you say, if you're running a global business right now, you should be thinking about what are the big opportunities for growth and expansion. All roads still lead to the US, which was a major finding from last year.
Yeah.
The US, I've read, and even from conversations with Treasury, could be the largest beneficiary of foreign direct investment this year around the world, which is a very significant data point in itself. So all roads still lead to the US. So all global businesses that are looking to tap into the consumer machine and the buyer machine, then the US see opportunity here. Our survey also realized the importance of APAC and the emergence of India, year-over-year increase in optimism that just the size of that economy, the ambition of that economy is going to lead to further opportunity. I think to de-risk your supply chain and find other opportunities for tapping into new consumer bases. So there are definitely pockets of challenge. There are definitely signals that CEOs are heeding as regards some contraction concerns in the economy. But overall, there are some big plays to make. There's some big mergers to consider. There's big acquisitions to embark upon. There's IPOs that you can bring to the market. There are some capital challenges, but not capital constraints, one could argue. And so the reasons for optimism are there, and the reasons for, I think, for pessimism are still there. And I think those that are brave, those that are entrepreneurial, those that see the opportunity, the signals and all this noise are expressing confidence for 26.
Your comments about India make me think of one of the interesting findings in this report. One of the most fascinating ones from my perspective was this question to CEOs of whether the disruption and change that they've been experiencing and trying to navigate through here for this year is it a temporary phenomenon that is going to sort of revert to mean either during this administration or perhaps in the next administration, but a foreseeable kind of return to business as normal? Or is there a real tectonic, structural, permanent shift afoot? And what was fascinating is that the results were roughly split, almost 50-50 between those believing the former versus the latter. But, to your point about looking at new opportunities in a place like, say, India, as you consider de-risking or not being overly leveraged to one country or supply chain or what have you, all of these decisions, though, are expensive and come as opportunity costs to doing something else or taking no action whatsoever or what have you. So I guess the question I have is sort of, what are you hearing as you talk to CEOs about making strategic decisions in this environment? Because you can only sort of kick the can so far down the road before that decision is going to be forced on you. And CEOs are paid what they are because they're making decisions with imperfect information. I get that. But this is about as imperfect of an information environment as you could be in.
Yeah, I think and you and I discussed this many times before, maybe tried to say, but China's still going to be the biggest maker and seller of goods and materials that the world needs. USA is going to be the biggest consumer and buyer. Europe is still going to be the biggest single sort of economic market, albeit it's not homogenous. Middle East is emerging as not just an exporter of capital, but an importer of capital and an exporter of IP and an importer of IP. And the China dynamic with the West is yielding a whole range of opportunities. As Secretary Percent was saying recently, we're not decoupling from China, we're de-risking some of the strategic node points with China, which again is presenting opportunities for businesses, including, I think, the expectation that India will be a potential long-term partner for companies around the world. But also, if you think about something that you and I have discussed recently, I think Mark Zuckerberg gets credited with it, but I think he has often quoted Bill Gates that we overestimate the impact that technology and change can have in the short term, in 1-2 years. And we tend to, as a society, underestimate the long-term impact of change and disruption for technology and other sources. So this disruption that we talk about, which feels challenging, it's daunting. I think most CEOs that I talk to have got this new confidence level and muscle memory through dealing with COVID, war, geopolitical disruption, political change, tectonic shifts happening in front of them. They now feel that they don't have the answers to everything, but they've definitely got a more fluent and entrepreneurial response system and a nervous system that can respond to change. And I think they're playing the hand that's been dealt them with more confidence now, as a consequence of the bruises that they might have suffered over the course of 25 or 24 and beyond. So these tectonic shifts are much discussed. There's a lot of inherent challenges and all that. But if you're running a company and your job is to get the best good or product or service to the market, right now as you sit around your executive table, you can process a lot of those known challenges. You can run models that alleviate or risk mitigate on those known challenges. But ultimately, you've got a buyer market that's growing. You've got a capital market that's getting more efficient. You've got emerging technologies on crypto and AI that are going to facilitate access to market in ways we can't even imagine today. So, you nailed it early on in the conversation, Kevin. If you're running a company around the world right now and you're not really crazy excited and optimistic for what this world is going to bring in terms of opportunity, you're probably in the wrong seat.
So, given that, and I know you and Teneo advise CEOs from around the world, but if I could focus on the American CEOs for a moment, do you get concerned at all that they, because they're American, they consume English language media like the rest of us do, they've got robust government affairs operations down in D.C., and we have a president who it's been famously said, his thinking is a mystery, but it's not a secret, whereas, say, Xi Jinping's thinking is a secret, but it's not a mystery. He's very clearly articulated kind of North Star where he wants to take China to. That we tend here to over-index on what's happening out of Washington, and with the understanding that it is the single most important and biggest and most disruptive driver. But at the same time, we kind of under-index on what everybody else is doing around the United States. And do you feel that the CEOs have got a clear-eyed view in a kind of holistic 360 way about what's going on in the world? I know they don't necessarily have the answers, but are looking at it in the right perspective given those restrictions.
Yeah, I think I understand the point. I would push back. I don't think American physically based CEOs have an American bias. I think they've probably got some of the best data sets on the planet, some of the best technology systems. I think they've always been globalists in their very nature. I just think there's been a lot of free movement of capital and IP and ideas. And as a consequence, one of the changes that has transpired, take the politics out of this, that most economies and most political leaders around the world have a growth agenda. They're finding ways to grow their economies. They're finding ways to embrace technologies. And CEOs are spending time with US-based CEOs spend time with international governments, with international regulators, with international investors. And I think the data set that they have is just richer and much faster than it ever has been. So I don't see any regional bias. And also I think CEOs are the best at understanding how you separate signal from noise. And they have to appreciate and understand the theater that is Brussels, the theater that is DC, the theater that is Beijing or any major regulatory or political center. But they've got, decadal experience in understanding how do you get to the best regulatory, legislative, or capital market outcome for your business. So there's there's acres of news every day, today included, prosecuting to the negative or the positive on some of the political moves that might be happening in DC. I think CEOs are laser-like focused on understanding if they've got a need or a want or an expectation from a regulatory or legislative body, they know how to prosecute that in the way that's in the best interest of their stakeholders, and they're not afraid to do it. Not a lot has changed, right? And there's a lot of covering and reporting has changed, but the basic principles of how you grow and protect your business, how you have an international perspective, how you're greedy for and curious for content around the world hasn't changed at all.
So by any stretch of the imagination, one of the real key stories of 2025 has been the rise of artificial intelligence. Actually, it's sort of shocking to think about how old ChatGPT actually already is at this point because of how profound this story has been in 2025. Focused so much, obviously, on the infrastructure builds, semiconductors, the national security elements, so on and so forth. But as we head into 2026, you've got increasing rumblings of the amount of concentration of market cap in the, in the AI related space, et cetera, the drag on energy, and the corresponding increase in energy costs around the country, and so on and so forth. But corporate America has been attempting to, the buyers of this technology essentially incorporate it into their enterprises and the like, to varying degrees of success, particularly relative to the amount of money that's being spent on the investment. So what do you see, and what do CEOs see as what's going to happen in 2026? If 2025 was this giant investment build, what is 2026? And, when you look at and talk to companies where some of them have been successes and some of them probably are still trying to kind of figure out what they're doing, is there a through thread on what separates those who are having a success in this space versus those that are not? And I'm not talking about the companies in the space themselves. I'm talking about everybody else who's going to be the user of this technology going forward.
Yeah. So it's obviously one of the biggest issues within our own report. And our report
has been growing every year
in
its space. Yeah.
And this year, our data sample is even more robust. We're talking about almost $20 trillion of market capitalization or assets under management. So that is a pretty hefty representation of the global capital markets and the global, I think, corporate markets. And the year-over-year trend, obviously, is to increase spending. Majority of companies would do so. I think there is still an expectation on the investor class that they want to see ROI in that spend sooner rather than later. I think the executive branch of this proposition, the C-suite, have to have a longer tail view. And I think we're transitioning, and the report has shown this, we're transitioning from, if 24 and 25 was about the search for efficiency and ensuring that you don't get left behind in that search for efficiency, I think 26 and beyond is the expectation among CEOs and investors that we're going to start moving to execution. One of the perhaps anomalies in the report is that there's an expectation for increasing in hiring in the first half of next year. And you juxtaposition that with even some of the reporting today in December 3rd of the fall off in some of the labor stats around the world. But I think that can be explained by a new realization on a year-over-year basis, which CEOs are taking more charge of their AI investment, not just on a capital allocation perspective, but what that investment end is ultimately. And I think there's a broad-based realization that you need men and women, engineers, who can use this technology to affect revenue outcomes, to affect new ideas, to affect R&D expansion, to think about total addressable market expansion. So I think you're moving into an era right now where the CEO class realizes this can't be a bottoms-up technology solution to reimagination of their existing business, which is efficiency, cost. It has to be about how do you embrace this new technology to expand customer proposition, to expand customer share, to think about new ways of making money and expanding their services. So I think you're seeing an expectation that companies are going to start hiring more engineers and hiring more talent who can leverage AI. That will obviously lead to potentially a challenge to the data this time next year in relation to jobs and hiring. So I think this AI investment era, the one big data point that has struck me anecdotally and through a report, is that CEOs are moving through the gears much quicker on realization that it is their responsibility to start driving AI investment, specifically around solving business case issues for their end markets. And that tension between the CEO and the CTO's office is a natural and healthy one. And I'd say that's going to drive a lot of, I think, very interesting application development.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, is that one of the critical dividing lines between those who are either successful or feel like the trend is going in the right way for them and their enterprises, where the CEO themselves is taking a very hands-on approach to the strategy here, and this is almost a daily touch point that they've got to have. And it's about not having, hey, we've got to have an AI strategy. It is, how do we get AI to help us fulfill our corporate mission and corporate strategy anyway. And there's a difference between those.
And year over year, you may remember some of this. I think some of the CEOs 12 months ago or so had a sense that they were being oversold to.
Yeah.
In terms of the rush to have the appropriate hardware, software, engineering capability, and tech stack to meet this future wave of applications that was going to transform their business. There was a little bit of a dynamic of, well, what are the applications that are going to transform my business, and an appreciation of understanding that needs to be a bespoke built opportunity as well as a bespoke built challenge. So that dynamic has now, I think, led to a more responsibility set to the moving towards the board, and particularly the CEO as leader of that board.
So I'd like to conclude by asking, as we head into 2026, with the economic uncertainties that we have, there will be a new Fed chairman early next year. The geopolitical shift is something that companies are going to be price takers on. We can't really affect that. And of course, looming out there is the midterm elections in the United States, and yet the juggernaut of things like artificial intelligence and energy transition, all of these things are going to continue. So, that's a lot of plates spinning in the air for CEO to wake up to every single morning, and a lot of plates spinning in the air for those who advise them every day. So, how do you? I mean, what's sort of the kind of best practices, approach that you're taking now in advising these people? And are they entering into 2026 confident that they've got the tools, both internally, externally, with advisors like ourselves and there are others, that they're actually pretty well equipped to be able to address these issues head on? Or do they feel like there's a real deficit out there somewhere that they need to fill?
Yeah, I think the way I think about it, and it's an element of a sort of Captain Obvious statement, but it's worth pausing on for a second. We live and our clients live in a world that is 24/7, and the media is 24/7. The political markets are 24/7. Some of the crypto trading markets are 24/7. The equity markets are going 24/5 soon, and an expectation it will go 24/7. There is a river of constant communication out there that is shaping opinions, that is influencing strategies, that is changing the dynamic of elections, it's moving markets. And I think companies are now moving towards an ability to actually understand how they best engage with that 24/7 river of content, and moving from perhaps being more of an analog actor in that environment to having investing in and starting to invest in having an always-on capability. So you can understand that 24/7 environment and participate in a more 24/7 way, which you cannot do that unless you embrace AI, unless you embrace the agentic path of AI, unless you understand the actual ecosystem that we all exist in, and seek to benefit from understanding that ecosystem, influence it as appropriate in a transparent fashion, and benefit from that. So the dashboard, the diagnostic toolkit of today's CEO is going to be vastly different, I'd say, 6-12 months' time. It will have this Spielberg, Disney-esque ability to understand the mood of the consumer today, tomorrow, the expectation of the consumer today, tomorrow, the needs of the consumer, even before those consumers' needs are expressed, and all the attendant content that fills those outcomes will be available at the touch of a button for all of our CEOs. Our job is to help them understand it, help them build it, but ultimately men and women have to make the decisions with that alpha data as to how they run their teams, lead their companies, make decisions through major tumult, be it political, geopolitical, societal. So those real attributes for leadership don't change, but I think the ability to have a richer data set is about to maybe flip a switch and change overnight. And that's the piece of the puzzle that's really exciting for that part of our business. Whether you're advising on a major restructuring mandate in Teneo, or you're helping, reimagine a company's actual strategy, if you're dealing with big reputational issues, if you're thinking about what's the talent dynamic of the executive suite, or you're thinking about big cyber risks, data and understanding data and having a scale-based model to prosecute that data is the new normal. And then being in a position better than anyone else to make the smarter decisions that how to protect or grow your market within those dynamics. That is probably one of the most interesting roles that we can play as a business, is help companies understand and build that new dashboard for the CEO of the future.
It's fascinating to me that, this survey each and every year is a good reason to sort of sit back and assess, and you kind of realize how much, how many issues don't really change, that are constant, and the things that are moving fast, and how much we have had to evolve along with that and stay ahead of the curve. It's a really remarkable attesting to what the team has been able to do, and better advisors as a result.
Yeah, and having this sort of annual growth in CEOs who want to participate, who love the data, added to that data lake that I referenced that they have to prosecute. But one of the most important things that we can do for our clients right now is to join them at the table as they put all these dynamics at play, put them on screen or put them on the table, assess what's the signal from the noise, assess what's important versus what's nice to do, assess where the competitive set are against those challenges, think through what political change look like in the US, what would geopolitical change look like in a more peaceful Middle East, what will the supply chain changes result from a conclusion, hopefully soon, of the war in Ukraine. All these dynamics, I think, it's fair to say it's an unprecedented level of expectation on a CEO or an investor to respond with speed and thoughtfulness through this dynamic. But the very issue that's disrupting their business technology is also going to be the salve to enable them to get to the most thoughtful and the most value creative decision in that process. And that is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating things since you and I started this process back in 2022. When we felt that year, you may remember, we thought that was a crazy year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It was nothing on this year, and it'll be nothing on next year.
Exactly. Paul, thank you so much. Appreciate it as always.
Yes.
The Vision 2026 CEO and Investor Survey is now out. There's a lot of data in there. I encourage you to take a look at it. If it prompts any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Teneo Insights at Teneo.com. Until next time, I'm Kevin Kajiwara in New York.